It's 9:45 a.m. in Tehran. Seconds from now, joint US-Israeli strikes will assassinate Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei and other top officials with a fleet of more than 100 aircraft. It's an act of war, but 6,000 miles away, in a small New York City office, diplomats from Khamenei's government have just hours to address the international community and respond directly to the US and Israel.
The flagrant act of aggression committed by the US and Israel on Iran, hundreds of civilians have been killed and injured. It is a war crime and a crime against humanity.
To the so-called representative of the Iranian regime, for 47 years, the Iranian regime has chanted, quote, "Death to America." It has even attempted to assassinate the US president.
You might be asking, how is this possible? The Iranian embassy in the US closed over 45 years ago. The two countries haven't had diplomatic relations since 1980. But the Iranians aren't alone here. Just a few blocks away, Venezuelan diplomats work out of another small New York office, while former President Nicolas Maduro sits imprisoned in Brooklyn. And a 5-minute walk from there sits an office staffed by North Korean diplomats who swear allegiance to Kim Jong-un. These fragile outposts are diplomatic lifelines between bitter enemies, hubs for foreign spies, flashpoints for international crisis, and the last thing America would ever willingly give up. Because the question isn't really why America tolerates enemy governments on its soil. It's why it can't afford to get rid of them. To understand why, let's dive into one of the most unique diplomatic arrangements in the world. This is the story of the New York missions of America's enemies. It's 1945. The Allies have just emerged victorious from World War II, but not without casualties exceeding 85 million people, 50 million of which were civilians. So, the US gets together with China, the Soviet Union, France, and the United Kingdom to agree that the best way to prevent future conflict is a unified body for diplomatic dialogue. So, they get together with 46 other countries in San Francisco to establish the United Nations. Diplomats started debating where the permanent home for this new United Nations should be. And most European cities weren't considered because they were still significantly damaged from the war, so the top contenders ended up being Boston, Montreal, San Francisco, and, incredibly, a site in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Ultimately, they went with New York in 1946 after an $8.5 million land donation from John D. Rockefeller. Most European countries saw this New World headquarters as a bit of a neutral zone where they could go to escape the heated rivalries back on their home continents. But the US isn't friendly with everybody. We're now in the middle of the Cold War. The US is worried about Soviet spies getting a free pass to set up shop in the capitalist beacon of New York City. They insist on retaining total control of which diplomats can represent at the UN. One congressman says, "Are we to be so naive as to believe that these people will not use this privilege for the purpose of espionage? We are opening our doors to a group of people who are dedicated to the destruction of our government." But the UN's first Secretary General hits back. The United Nations must be a place where all nations can meet on an equal footing. If the host country can decide who is allowed to attend, the United Nations ceases to be an international organization. Eventually, the US agrees to allow all UN member countries the right to a permanent mission and diplomats in New York City as part of the 1947 UN Headquarters Agreement. But they snuck in one critical caveat. Nothing in this agreement shall be construed as in any way diminishing the right of the United States to safeguard its own security and completely to control the entrance of aliens into any territory of the United States other than the headquarters district and its immediate vicinity. Let's look at that first part, safeguard its own security. The US occasionally uses these few words to delay or, in some cases, flatly block certain individuals from ever reaching the UN. In 2014, Iran nominated a new UN ambassador. The US refused to issue him a visa, citing his involvement in the 1979 Iran hostage crisis. Even though the UN headquarters agreement technically forbids the US from blocking member state representatives, Congress passed a law specifically to bar him. More recently, the US, along with 50 other countries, refused to acknowledge Maduro's government as legitimate in 2018 and decided to back opposition leader Juan Guaido as the legitimate interim president. The US let Guaido's government take over the Washington embassy and New York consulate, while Maduro's government got the UN mission, leading to an NYC standoff of dueling regimes. Again, the US lobbied to allow Guaido's officials to represent Venezuela at the UN, but the UN refused, though Guaido's diplomats managed to sneak in with delegations from sympathetic countries.
In Venezuela, there's only one government, the government of President Maduro.
Guaido's government closed its doors in 2023, and Maduro's government still represents Venezuela at the UN. Now, let's break down the second part about controlling movement outside the headquarters district and its immediate vicinity. In practice, it means that the US keeps enemy diplomats chained to UN headquarters. The State Department keeps a list of these countries, like Venezuela and North Korea, whose diplomats can't travel further than 25 miles from Turtle Bay, the NYC neighborhood that houses most UN missions. But in Iran's case, the US proved that it can always tighten the leash further. The US shrunk the Iranian circle of movement down to just blocks deemed absolutely necessary for transit between UNHQ, the Iranian mission, and the Iranian ambassador's residence. And in 2025, the US tightened restrictions again and slapped Iranian diplomats with a ban on purchases above $1,000 or vehicle purchases above $60,000, and even banned them from wholesale stores like Target and Costco. The US says the move is meant to prevent the clerical elite from enjoying a shopping spree while ordinary Iranians face abject poverty. And UN missions aren't embassies. Those are found exclusively in Washington and reserved for those countries with whom the US maintains diplomatic relations. The US grants freedom of movement to nearly every embassy's staff and even allows them to set up smaller offices, or consulates, in any other city they see fit. The UN diplomats for those same countries usually also get the same freedom of movement, but for enemy states, or those with no diplomatic relations, the US does the bare minimum. In 2017, North Korea claimed its diplomats were, quote, mugged while trying to fly out of John F. Kennedy International Airport when US Department of Homeland Security agents forcibly seized a, quote, diplomatic package from its delegation. North Korea labeled the US a, quote, gangster state for violating their diplomatic protections. But there's a fundamental difference between diplomatic immunity for bilateral diplomats, like a Canadian ambassador to the US, and for UN diplomats. Bilateral diplomats get what's called complete immunity, meaning they legally can't be prosecuted for crimes they commit in the country, and their personal luggage is never searched. But UN diplomats, like these North Koreans, get what's called functional immunity that extends only to official UN business. Because these were UN delegates, the US argued that they were legally allowed to search the items because they weren't officially marked or verified as UN diplomatic pouches. The US seems to do everything it can to make life uncomfortable for these diplomatic missions, but to expel them entirely would break international law. With a system so deeply rooted in tension, the existence of these missions is nothing short of a diplomatic miracle. Let's take a tour around Turtle Bay to learn more about each of them, and why the US would want to keep them around. Turtle Bay is the place for the world's governments to see and be seen on the premier international stage. Countries like the United Arab Emirates, India, and, of course, the United States occupy bold, grand, and sometimes imposing structures near UNHQ. But these enemy missions? They're significantly more understated. There's an entire website dedicated to how beautiful the UAE's mission is, but the missions of our enemy governments are shrouded in mystery. Here's the only photo I could find of North Korea's permanent mission, which shows a diplomat inviting envoys to sign a condolence book after the death of Supreme Leader Kim Jong-il in 2011. Those who visit the mission say the 8,000 square foot space is blocked off by a solid brown door with a tiny peephole. Inside, witnesses say each room is adorned with portraits of former Supreme Leaders Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. Though this picture makes it look like any other North Korean government office in Pyongyang, the mission shares its halls and bathrooms with several other tenants, including investment firms, a dermatology clinic, and even a marijuana dispensary a few floors down. And here's the only interior photo I could find of Iran's permanent mission, of what I assume is a waiting room. Eyewitnesses describe it as a typical office environment. What's often described more lavishly is the Iranian ambassador's residence on Fifth Avenue, where Iran does most of its diplomatic wheeling and dealing in New York City. This 5-story limestone townhouse is adorned with traditional Persian rugs, antique mirrors, and crystal chandeliers. As the most visible representation of Iran in New York, it's often the site of protests. Venezuela's permanent mission is by far the most mysterious. Eyewitness accounts describe a first-floor security screening area that's very thorough before ascending to office spaces adorned with pictures of Nicolas Maduro and Hugo Chavez. But this may not be the case for Venezuela much longer. Relations are normalizing. In March of 2026, the US raised their flag at their embassy in Caracas, and the Venezuelan embassy in Washington is said to be reopening soon. Maybe that means we'll see a little bit of an ease in tensions from this secluded mission. Perhaps even more mysterious than the offices are the workers themselves. North Korea, Iran, and Venezuela's missions employ between 10 and 15 people at a time. Shockingly, North Korean diplomats are by far the most well-known out of the bunch in New York City. UN reports say North Korean diplomats are paid between $300 and $600 a month. Though the government claims to cover all living expenses, New Yorkers have spotted the diplomats fishing in the polluted East River. They also all share one apartment on Roosevelt Island and commute to the office in shared vans. North Korean diplomats are known worldwide for using their posts as bases for illicit activities to send money back to Kim Jong-un's government and to subsidize their own meager salaries. North Korean officials also racked up over $156,000 in unpaid parking tickets back in 2017. Still, they're rarely seen interacting with the public, with the sole exception of one New Jersey barbecue restaurant. It's owned by Robert Egan, a man who visited North Korea several times in the early 90s and befriended North Korea's UN diplomats, who felt isolated in New York. He took senior delegates fishing, to New York Giants games, and, of course, to have ribs and burgers at Cubby's restaurant.
Koreans love barbecue.
The North Koreans even came to Cubby's to console themselves after Kim Jong-il's death. The CIA approached Egan for information on the North Koreans, and he obliged, though that did cause relations to ice over. But Egan claims that a North Korean spy still dines at his restaurant to this day. Still, stories like these are few and far between. The day-to-day of most of these offices involve attending UN meetings, filing protests at said meetings, and reporting back to their home countries. Security is tight to prevent sensitive diplomatic materials from leaking into the open jaws of the US intelligence machine. But there's more at play here for these countries. More to gain. Given the rare chance to station permanent operatives on US soil, why not try to spy on your greatest foe? When WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange took refuge at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, British police couldn't arrest him for years. That's because foreign diplomatic offices, like an embassy or a UN mission, are considered inviolable by local authorities under international law. So basically, without the foreign government's say-so, police can't come in and enforce local laws. But it's not like North Korea's 10th floor office in New York is sovereign territory of North Korea in New York. It's a gray area where local laws are considered unenforceable. It's this legal security that allows North Korea, Iran, and Venezuela to use their missions as hubs for illicit activity, aka spying or any sorts of crime that benefits their regime's objectives. In December of 2025, the US State Department quietly expelled Iran's deputy UN ambassador, citing national security concerns. The State Department cited Section 13 procedures, a mechanism usually reserved for diplomats accused of activities contrary to US interests, such as espionage or illicit intelligence gathering. 2 junior diplomats had been expelled in months prior for repeatedly violating their 25-mile boundary, resulting in the US tightening the circle to just a few blocks, as we discussed earlier, more restricted than even North Korea. In 2004, the US expelled 2 Iranian bodyguards for closely videotaping bridges, subway stations, and popular landmarks like the Statue of Liberty. In 2021, Iranian intelligence agents were caught red-handed in a plot straight out of an action movie, attempting to kidnap an Iranian-American journalist from her Brooklyn home. Agents hired US private investigators under false pretenses to track her, installed cameras in her home, and had planned to kidnap her, throw her in a military-style speedboat, and rush her to friendly Venezuela. When that didn't work, the regime tried and failed to kill her at least 3 times. The coordinators setting these agents up in New York? Iran's UN mission. And North Korea has made more than its fair share of attempts at crime on US soil. In January 2026, US officials briefed the UN on a North Korean illicit IT worker scam being coordinated through North Korea's UN mission. North Korean workers would ask US professionals to interview for well-paying remote IT jobs and then use that US identity to make money from the shadows. In the worst cases, North Koreans got jobs at defense companies that had access to sensitive or classified documents. In another instance, North Koreans set up 2 fake US companies in New York and New Mexico to hack into developers in the cryptocurrency industry. The UN mission was reportedly used to manage proceeds from over $2 billion in cryptocurrency heists in 2025 alone, and funnel the money towards Kim Jong-un's nuclear missile program. Things are changing fast in Venezuela's UN mission after Maduro's capture, but at least in its heyday, the Venezuelan mission was used similarly as a hub for intelligence gathering and illicit activity, including drug trafficking. US officials say mission diplomats helped criminals get into the US, sometimes creating false documents to do so. The Cartel of the Suns was allegedly deeply interconnected with the Maduro regime and took advantage of Venezuela's diplomatic missions to traffic drugs into the US. And, just the same as with Iran and North Korea, the Venezuelan mission was allegedly a base for good old-fashioned spying, primarily on Venezuelan opposition figures abroad. Venezuela's UN ambassador vehemently denies these allegations and asserts that the US is using lies as a pretext for illegitimate armed attacks and kidnappings, particularly of Maduro. Again, we return to the question of why would the US want these missions in New York, beyond of course being legally required to host them? Obviously, the US doesn't want murder plots, drug trafficking, and espionage running rampant in their most populous city, but it all comes back to an age-old phrase: keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. Just as the enemy missions get a better look at the US from the inside, the US gets the unique and valuable opportunity to spy on top enemy officials right at their doorstep. And with the home field advantage and the most sophisticated intelligence operation on Earth, it's easy to see why counterintelligence is one of the reasons to tolerate opposing governments setting up shop in Manhattan. It's important to note that the US has never publicly admitted to intercepting messages from or spying on these missions specifically, but it's highly likely. The FBI is legally allowed to surveil foreign diplomatic missions as much as they want, as US law states that being a foreign power or agent of a foreign power counts as probable cause. It's unlikely that they'd pass up the chance to easily tap into phone calls and emails from members of enemy regimes right there in New York City. And the US has a documented history of surveilling the UN. CIA documents leaked in 2010 reveal the US asking its UN diplomats to collect passport, biometric, credit card, and even frequent flyer details from foreign delegates, and specifically asked them to target ranking North Korean UN diplomats. They also reportedly targeted Iranian and Venezuelan representatives from other diplomatic offices. And in 2013, the Edward Snowden leaks detailed an incident where the National Security Agency, or NSA, planted bugs and tapped fiber optic cables in the European Union's UN office in New York. The NSA also planted bugs in the communication equipment at UN headquarters, allowing them to listen in on nearly anything happening inside, including private internal video calls. Most of what there is to know about the surveillance wars between the US and its enemy missions is likely highly classified. However, what is publicly available paints a pretty clear picture of rival nations duking it out in the shadows of Manhattan. Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela use their legitimate diplomatic outposts in New York City to conduct surveillance, commit crimes, and further their regime's respective goals in the US. The US, in turn, likely spies on these missions, using its home field advantage to tap phone lines, follow mission personnel, bug offices, and more. It's not an ideal situation for either side. There's immense amounts of risk involved here. But in the shadow game of New York City intelligence gathering, the US is sure to come out on top. The US and its enemy missions don't just exchange threats and spy on each other. Sometimes they talk to each other. When embassies don't exist, this valuable back channel has brought prisoners home, set up major bilateral summits, and prevented nukes from being launched. Our enemy countries make their disdain for the US well known back home. In Tehran, a massive Down with the USA mural just got repainted, and anti-American graffiti covers the former American embassy. In Pyongyang, propaganda posters explicitly depict attacks on America, including the Capitol building. And in Caracas, several prominent murals depict Uncle Sam getting a beat down and labeling America as imperialist. These sentiments feed into fiery confrontations at the UN. North Korean diplomats once stormed into a US-led meeting to protest the presence of North Korean defectors.
We will continue our panel, and you can speak when the panel has concluded. I think the audience will agree that it's better to allow the DPRK to speak, since it is a self-discrediting exercise.
These #1 leads are just a bit of icebergs among the human rights violations committed in the U.S. every day.
Please shut the mic down, since this is not an authorized presentation. If we could ask the acoustic
The
people.
act of racial
So we are calling UN security. Sir, you can either conclude your remarks or you will be removed from the room.
The US responds in kind, with politicians and media outlets alike painting a resoundingly negative picture of these countries, oppressed by terrorism, drug trafficking, or even the ability to destroy the world with nuclear weapons. As we've discussed, the US doesn't have diplomatic relations with North Korea or Iran, and only recently started normalizing with Venezuela. These UN missions are reserved primarily for multilateral conversations, only present in the US because that's where UNHQ is. But sometimes, under extraordinary circumstances, these countries still need to negotiate. You'd be surprised how often, and for how long, the US has used this New York channel for meaningful diplomatic dialogue. The most notable use of this back channel to Iran happened in the lead up to the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, aka the Iran nuclear deal, that saw Iran pledge never to build a nuclear weapon in exchange for sanction relief. The UN mission was a major starting point for these talks, as officials met behind closed doors to set up the official meetings that would take place in Iran. That doesn't mean this channel is just for mid-level diplomats. In 2000, US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright met with Iranian officials from the mission, where she formally admitted to the 1953 CIA coup in Iran, alongside lifting some sanctions. And in 2001, the US and Iran collaborated via their UN missions to establish an agreement to defeat the Taliban, a shared enemy. Whether it's being used right now is up for debate. President Donald Trump claims to have had productive back-channel talks with Iran in March and April of 2026 that led to his decision to temporarily suspend the deadline on Iran's opening of the Strait of Hormuz. But Iran's foreign minister claims no such talks have happened, and what they have heard from the US came via regional mediators. Venezuela's New York back channel saw its heaviest use in decades in December of 2025. The US used it to offer Nicolas Maduro multiple diplomatic, quote, off-ramps. Basically, chances to resign or cease operations before the US took action. It didn't really work, but the back channel saw more success after Maduro's capture. Just after Maduro got locked up, the US contacted the Venezuelan UN mission to coordinate the release of 100 political prisoners from the El Bertador prison. The back channel was also used to facilitate a direct US envoy meeting in Caracas that resulted in the release of 6 American prisoners. This UN channel got so much use in such a short period of time in the late 2010s that UN Ambassador Bill Richardson continued negotiating with Venezuela even after leaving office way back in 1998. With the quiet approval of the State Department, he negotiated the release of American missionary Joshua Holt in 2018. Perhaps the most famous, prolific, and important UN back channel the US has is with North Korea. It's actually the diplomatic relationship that inspired the New York Channel name. In 1994, US and North Korean officials met at the North Korean mission to bang out the 1994 Agreed Framework, their first bilateral denuclearization agreement. Soon after, Bill Richardson, he's back, met with the North Koreans several times throughout the 90s to negotiate repatriation for political prisoners and the remains of a US Army pilot after North Korea shot him down for crossing into the DMZ. In 1997, the US pressured North Korean diplomats at the UN to end Scud missile sales. But the moments that put this tiny New York office in the spotlight came in the 2010s. In 2017, the US used the New York Channel to negotiate the release of then comatose Otto Warmbier, a University of Virginia student who was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor after allegedly stealing a propaganda poster during a New Year's trip to Pyongyang. US envoy Joseph Yun met with North Korean ambassador Pak Song-il in New York to learn of Warmbier's condition before traveling to Pyongyang for the medical evaluation. And then, 2 historic meetings back to back. The road to Trump's first ever summit with Kim Jong-un came after some rocky comments.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
And though South Korea delivered Kim's original invitation, the job of smoothing things over ultimately fell to those meeting with North Korean officials in New York. In late May 2018, Kim Jong-un's top aide Kim Yong-chol traveled to New York to meet with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. This visit was crucial for delivering a personal letter from Kim Jong-un to Trump, which brought the summit back from the dead. The leaders met and agreed broadly to a complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The following February of 2019, officials reconvened via the New York Channel to define exactly what denuclearization and sanctions relief would look like. Ultimately, the diplomats managed to get Trump and Kim a meeting in Hanoi later that month, but talks ultimately fell apart. North Korea demanded the lifting of 5 key UN sanctions in exchange for closing the Yongbyon nuclear facility, a deal the US rejected as insufficient. President Trump ultimately walked away from the talks, and just a few years later, Kim Jong-un's sister and top advisor, Kim Yo-jong, said that North Korea had no intention of ever denuclearizing. During President Joe Biden's term, the channel went quiet, as messages sent by the US went largely unanswered through 2024 and into 2025. But there's a flicker of hope for the future. President Trump and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung have both recently expressed interest in another meeting with Kim Jong-un, a proposal Pyongyang has flatly rejected due to America's, quote, obsession with denuclearization. However, political analysts believe that there's a decent chance Trump could meet with Kim in late 2026. Experts noted that North Korea recently distanced themselves from Iran, avoiding sending weapons and condolences after the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei. After Trump's Beijing visit in May of 2026 ended with no North Korean rendezvous, some point to the APEC conference in November of 2026 as the next potential meeting date. If or when talks do resume, they'll almost certainly be run through the New York Channel. Diplomacy is rarely about laying your cards on the table. It's about getting the other side to do something that they don't want to do, which sometimes means saying the opposite of how you feel. So yes, the US has publicly decried these missions for decades, and privately, it's relied on them for just as long, to spy, to signal, and to negotiate when there's no other way. It's been months since the US-Iran war began. The two sides have clashed at the UN Security Council. Diplomats have called each other liars on the world stage. As of this video's production, a silver lining is hard to find. But if these New York missions didn't exist, if these countries had no window into what each other was thinking, things could be so much worse. Hi, I'm Chaz Chappell. I wrote, edited, and researched this video, and I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you so very much for watching to the end of this video. This has been a labor of love, and I hope you enjoyed it. With that being said, I have 2 humble requests of you. First is, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more, please consider subscribing, leaving a like, and a comment. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Second, with this being a growing channel, I'm looking to collaborate with talented people to help build it out. So if you're a great writer, editor, researcher, or you're great on camera, I would love to hear from you. please feel free to reach out in the email or link in the description. I'm excited to get out into the field, travel, do interviews, everything I possibly can to make this content as great as it can be for you, the viewer. So again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.